Trading is not what you think. Why is trading so hard to understand? Have you ever wondered, why do so many people spend years learning about trading? Watching videos, reading books, studying indicators, learning candlestick patterns, learning support and resistance, learning technical analysis, and yet, after all those years, they still struggle to truly understand the market? Why? Is trading really that complicated, or are we simply trying to understand it in the wrong way? I used to ask myself the same question, because the more I learned about trading, the more I realized there was always something I didn't understand. I learned about candlesticks, then I discovered candlestick patterns. Then I learned about support and resistance, then trend, then price action, then technical indicators, then risk management, then trading psychology. And somehow the more I learned, the more complicated trading seemed to become. It felt like I was collecting pieces of a puzzle, but I still couldn't see the whole picture. And that's when I started asking a different question. Maybe the problem isn't that the market is too complicated. Maybe the problem is we don't know how to connect the information. Think about it. A candlestick is information. A candlestick pattern is information. A fractal is information. A swing is information. A wave is information. A trend is information. An indicator is information. But information by itself doesn't automatically become understanding. You need to know how one piece of information relates to another. And that's where I believe trading starts to become interesting, because the market is constantly giving us data. Every candle, every movement, every reaction, every breakout, every failure, every higher high, every lower low is telling us something. But the market doesn't explain it to us. It doesn't give us a manual. It doesn't say, here is what I'm doing. We have to observe, we have to compare, we have to question, and perhaps most importantly, we have to think. This is how I began looking at trading, not as a collection of strategies, not as a collection of indicators, but as a problem that needs to be understood, a puzzle, a system, almost like cracking a secret code. Because every time I look at a chart, I see something interesting. Two situations can look almost identical, but produce completely different outcomes. A bullish candle can appear, and sometimes price continues higher. Another bullish candle can appear, and price immediately reverses. A breakout can happen, and sometimes it becomes a strong trend. Another breakout can happen, and it becomes a trap. A reversal pattern can appear, and sometimes the market reverses. Another reversal pattern can appear, and price simply continues in the original direction. So, what is the difference? That's the question that interests me. Not which indicator should I use, but why did this happen? And why did the other situation produce a different result? Because I believe if we keep asking the right questions, eventually we start seeing relationships. And when we see relationships, we start seeing structure. And when we understand structure, the market begins to look different. The candles are no longer just candles. The patterns are no longer just patterns. The movement is no longer just price going up and down. We begin to see a story, a sequence, a relationship between events. And perhaps that's where real understanding begins. But here's the interesting part. I don't think understanding the market comes from knowing more and more information. At some point, it comes from knowing how to think about the information you already have. Because you can learn 100 trading strategies and still not understand the market. You can memorize hundreds of candlestick patterns and still not understand the market. You can use 10 indicators and still not understand the market. But if you learn how to observe, how to compare, how to identify relationships, how to recognize structure, and how to understand why one event leads to another, then perhaps you're no longer simply learning trading. You are beginning to understand the market. And this is the journey that I have been on. A journey that started not with a perfect strategy, not with a secret indicator, but with a simple curiosity, a desire to understand why. Why does price move? Why does a trend continue? Why does a trend end? Why does a breakout succeed? Why does a breakout fail? Why does a reversal become real? And why does another reversal completely fail? I don't claim to have every answer, but I believe the market leaves clues. And if we are willing to observe those clues carefully, systematically, Without rushing to conclusions, we may begin to see something that we couldn't see before. And perhaps the real challenge of trading is not predicting the future. Perhaps it is learning how to correctly interpret the present, because before we can understand where price might go, we first need to understand where price is, how it got there, and what has already happened. So, if you are someone who has spent years learning trading but still feels something is missing, maybe you are not alone. Maybe the answer isn't another indicator. Maybe it isn't another strategy. Maybe it isn't another candlestick pattern. Maybe what is missing is a different way of thinking. And that is the question I want to leave you with. If trading is really a system and the market is constantly giving us data, then what happens when we stop looking at individual signals and start looking at the relationships between them? Maybe that's where the real story begins. Because trading may look like a game of predicting price, but perhaps it's actually something much deeper. Perhaps it's a process of observation, a process of reasoning, a process of connecting information until the market starts to make sense. And maybe that's the real secret code, not a secret indicator, not a secret strategy, but learning how to see, learning how to think, and learning how to understand what the market is actually telling us. If you want to explore this way of thinking about trading, subscribe to Bias Positive Digital Rise, because here we don't just look at the market, we learn how to think about it.